9 Palestinians were killed in a double IDF airstrike in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, while the tenuous ceasefire between Israel and Hamas remains artificially extended. More details have been published about the latest U.S. proposals for more hostage release, after both the United States and Israel rejected Hamas's announcement that it will be willing to release a U.S. hostage in exchange for a list of demands. I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive deep into the latest developments in the Israel-Hamas War. On Saturday, March 19th, 9 Palestinians were killed in the northern Gaza region of Beit Lahia after 2 IDF airstrikes targeted their gathering site. The IDF reported that the military had identified 2 Palestinians operating a drone in the region in a manner that endangered IDF troops, and an airstrike targeted their position. Following this, a group of Palestinians attempted to gather the remains of the drone and leave the area, and their car was also targeted with a second airstrike, resulting in 7 more people being killed. Palestinian sources in turn reported that the people had been part of a news crew that had been operating a drone in order to document the iftar meal during Ramadan that was taking place in the region, adding that among those killed were at least 3 journalists. Responding to these Palestinian sources, the IDF put out a later report stating that the airstrike had targeted terrorists, one of whom had participated in the October 7th attack, and that some of them were masquerading as journalists. The military also published the names of 6 of those who had been killed, adding that the drone that they were using had in the past been used by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In addition to this, the IDF also reported that earlier in the day, 3 Palestinians were identified planting roadside explosives devices near the Netzarim corridor, and they were attacked as well. However, there were no reports about if there were any casualties in that attack. With this, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip reported that the number of Palestinians that have been killed in Gaza since the truce began nearly 2 months ago has now climbed to 107, with today being the deadliest day so far since the truce began. Turning from this to the broader question of what is the current situation in the ceasefire, what is happening between the sides, several different proposals have been raised by the different actors over the last week. As a reminder, the terms of the initial agreement between the sides stipulated that Phase 2 of the ceasefire will be a mutual declaration of an end to the war, the complete IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and the release of all hostages in exchange for an undetermined amount of Palestinian prisoners. Relating to this, Israel has thus far refused to negotiate the implementation of Phase 2, and has instead put forth a series of proposals for the extension of Phase 1 of the agreement instead. What this would mean is the continued truce between the sides, continued entrance of humanitarian aid, and exchange of hostages for an agreed amount of Palestinian prisoners who would be released from Israeli jails, but importantly for Israel, this would be without the complete IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and there would also be a set date when fighting can resume, i.e. there would be no declaration of an end to the war. Instead, it would be a set phase of how long will the truce be, and then fighting can resume. Hamas in turn has rejected the proposal for an extension of Phase 1, and has instead advocated 2 different options. The first, which the group favors, is the full implementation of Phase 2, with Hamas offering the release of all hostages in one event instead of the staggered releases that we've seen until now. It's important to note that despite these statements, the full implementation of Phase 2 would require a substantial amount of negotiations, specifically about the formula of how many Palestinian prisoners would be released in exchange for each Israeli hostage, and thus this proposal of Hamas is more a call to negotiate Phase 2 rather than to immediately implement it. The second option that Hamas has put forward is a much smaller deal. Hamas proposed this on March 14th. Responding to U.S. pressure on the matter, Hamas proposed to release 1 live hostage who also holds U.S. citizenship, this is Idan Alexander, alongside returning the bodies of 4 more hostages. They did not mention names, but presumably these would be the 4 hostages who also hold U.S. citizenship. These are bodies of hostages that are still held in the Gaza Strip. In exchange, according to leaks reported in Al Jazeera, Hamas made a series of demands, which include beginning the immediate negotiations on implementing Phase 2 of the deal, continued and retroactive entrance of humanitarian aid into Gaza, the immediate withdrawal of the IDF from the Philadelphia corridor, which, according to the original deal, was supposed to happen by March 9th, but it never did. In addition to this, Hamas added 2 more demands, which would be that Gazan Palestinians who have exited the Strip through the Rafah crossing be allowed to return back to Gaza, and also the cancellation of the inspection of cars that are making their way north through the Salahuddin Road. This is part of the stipulation of Phase 1 that any cars that return to northern Gaza undergo inspection. Hamas has demanded that that be removed as part of this proposal of returning the hostages with U.S. citizenship. Israel did not formally respond to this proposal, but it made public statements that it is not being taken seriously. The United States in turn put out statements saying that this proposal is impractical. Alongside these Israeli and Hamas initiatives, the United States has also been very active over the last weeks, advancing possible deals in at least two distinct channels. One of these was a direct channel of negotiations with Hamas, and direct talks were held between Lahia, that he's a member of Hamas's official leadership council and also Hamas's representative of the Gaza Strip. He met in person with the U.S. Special Envoy for Hostage Situations, Adam Bowler. Those talks reportedly went far beyond negotiations over U.S. hostages. They included discussions of release of all hostages, long-term 5 to 10-year ceasefire between the sides, Hamas disarming and a new governing mechanism in the Gaza Strip, and many more facets. I'm not going to get into all of the details about that channel since, according to reports, the communication channel between the sides has been frozen at the moment. If you want more details about what those talks actually included, check out my upload from March 9th on my YouTube channel where I discuss those proposals at length. The second channel that has been advanced by the United States is the deal that is being proposed by the U.S. Special Envoy to the region, Steve Witkoff, described by Witkoff himself as a quote-unquote bridge deal meant to extend Phase 1 and lay the foundation for Phase 2. Witkoff's proposal focuses on a limited release of between 3 to 5 live hostages and the return of 3 to 5 bodies of hostages from the Gaza Strip, in exchange for a 50-day truce and reinstating the entrance of humanitarian aid into Gaza. It's important to note that the initial publication of the deal did not elaborate on the amount of Palestinian prisoners who would be released as part of this smaller deal. However, different leaks have suggested that Israel would release as part of this deal 1,100 Palestinians who were arrested in the Gaza Strip since the war began, 120 Palestinian prisoners who are quote-unquote heavy prisoners, those are prisoners who are sentenced to life in Israeli jails, and return the bodies of 160 Palestinians who are held by Israel. While Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeatedly stated over the last week that Israel has accepted the Witkoff proposal, the country has in fact submitted several reservations and additional demands, among others that the number of live hostages released be increased to be between 10 and 11, and that Israel receive life signs from all remaining live hostages in the Gaza Strip, and that the truce, according to this deal, be limited to 40 days instead of to 50 days. Hamas in turn has not made any public statement about Witkoff's initiative, and while the group has stated that it will not discuss extending Phase 1 and only discuss the implementation of Phase 2, it was also reported earlier this evening that Hamas has given its response to the deal to the negotiating parties, indicating that while Hamas is saying it's not going to negotiate anything other than the full implementation of Phase 2, it is at least taking this initiative seriously. I will state, however, that it was not reported in the different leaks what did Hamas actually say in response, what is its demands, but it is at least not ignoring this initiative and instead putting forth its response. So with all this, where do things stand right now in the Gaza Strip between the sides? Officially, Phase 1 of the ceasefire ended on March 1st, and the deal stipulated that the terms of Phase 1 will continuously be extended so long as Phase 2 of the deal is being negotiated, i.e. the terms of Phase 1, which include a truce between the sides, the entrance of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, and the continued IDF redeployment and withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor, were supposed to continue so long as Phase 2 is being negotiated. However, despite all of the ongoing initiatives, Phase 2 is in fact not being negotiated and has not been negotiated between the sides thus far, so theoretically the ceasefire agreement between the sides has expired. Nonetheless, there appears to be, at least to some extent, a tacit agreement between the sides to artificially extend the truce right now. Despite the occasional incidents, like the one I reported above in Beit Lahia, there has been no return to active fighting between the sides. Regarding the other facets of Phase 1, the humanitarian aid and IDF redeployment, the IDF has thus far held its redeployed positions in the Gaza Strip of Phase 1. It has not moved further into the Gaza Strip and into populated Palestinian areas. In turn, it has also not carried out the withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor that it was supposed to carry out according to the terms of the deal by March 9th. Regarding humanitarian aid, on March 2nd, Israel announced that it is stopping the transfer of all humanitarian aid and fuel into the Gaza Strip, stating that the terms of Phase 1 are no longer in effect and that if Hamas wants humanitarian aid, it must agree to release more hostages. On March 9th, Israel also cut off the one electrical power line that connects to the sanitation plant in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. The government has also made repeated statements that the pressure on Hamas will continue to increase, including potentially cutting off the water lines from Israel into the Gaza Strip if there is no advancement made on the hostage deal. When it comes to understanding why, on the one hand, we have had the IDF not withdrawing with the Philadelphia corridor, Israel stopping the entrance of humanitarian aid, and other incidents like we saw in Beit Lahia on the one hand, on the other hand, the truce being broadly upheld between the sides, in a moment of analysis, I'll say that Hamas has a vested interest in the truce itself being maintained for as long as possible, regardless of any of the other facets of Phase 1. Hamas is very busy regrouping in the Gaza Strip. According to reports, it is very busy right now not only in developing more weaponry and preparing itself for a return to fighting, it is also actively engaged in recruitment in order to sort of refill the ranks of the organization. According to some reports, Hamas has already managed to recruit thousands of people. Some reports stated over 10,000 people have already been recruited and are currently undergoing training, and thus the group has a vested interest in the truce being maintained for as long as possible. Israel, in turn, is likely fearful of being held accountable by the Trump administration if it is the one that reignites the active war in the Gaza Strip. It's important to note that despite the rhetoric of the U.S. president about Israel being, quote-unquote, allowed to return to fighting whenever it wants, it has also been reported that Steve Witkoff has asked Israel not to return to fighting as long as his negotiation efforts are taking place. Likely this is the reason that both sides are being kept at bay. Hamas has an interest, no matter what else Israel does, in not returning to active fighting yet, and Israel in turn is being held at bay by the United States, not wanting to be seen as the one that causes the return to active fighting in the Gaza Strip, while the Trump administration is still trying to negotiate some sort of long-term ceasefire between the sides. That is my highlight on the current situation in the Israel-Hamas War and the truce between the sides. If you find these reports informative, please remember to send them on to anyone you think might be interested in the war. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.